Hi, my name is Hirebet, and I work for trendwatching.com. And today we're going to be talking about the future. So I thought I could start and show you cyborgs and brain technology and how we're all going to be in flying cars. But instead, I thought because we're in Asia that we should look at Asia's future. And I think Asia's future is that it's going to be very, very urban, and that's going to create amazing ideas and opportunities, but also a lot of problems because we're a very, very packed region. Before I start, I'm supposed to talk a little bit about myself. So I'm a very curious person. This is me trying to get tickets in a Beijing temple. And I've spent 7 years in advertising, and what I did is I moved to China on sort of a whim. And I decided over there that I wanted to really get to know China, and the best way to do that was to leave advertising, no offense to anyone, and go into market research. So I literally went into Chinese people's homes, I ransacked their fridges, I walked around with them all over the place. And it gave me a really interesting understanding of China, and it also gave me a real appreciation for people as well. And I think one of the most important things is when you're looking at people, it's to understand actual mindsets. So what you think a consumer might think about might be a little bit different from like a marketing perspective or the message that you're getting out there. And yeah, that's a bit of a quirky image and a sign from China near the Great Wall. So after doing that, I thought I really love trends and I'd like to get into Asian trends. And that's when I joined trendwatching.com. So trendwatching is based out of London and set up their Asian office over here last year in September. What we do is we track consumer trends from all over the world. And we do that by actually looking at emerging products and innovations that are coming up. So if you do like what you see, we have free monthly briefings. And what we do is we actually aggregate content from all over the world and we decide what we think is happening exactly in that month. And for those who do like it, then we have a client, sort of a subscription to a database where we have a monthly feed of literally what's going on around the world. And all our Asian content feeds into that as well. And what we have put out recently is an Asian trend report. And that's a little bit about what you're going to see today. And so it covers 40 trends that are happening in the region and 20 examples from different countries. And I think one of the main things to sort of remember about Asia is that a lot of times there's this tendency to think that concepts get taken from somewhere else and they get transported over here and just fed it out. But really, Asia's a very different place today. A lot of innovation is happening here, and Asian brands are doing it sometimes as well, if not better, because they know their Asian consumers really well. And you get innovation in every corner of the world. We have examples from like Myanmar and Nepal that I think are amazing, and they actually really show forward thinking. So I really think you should get inspired by many, many different places in Asia. And that's where we're going to start. So before I start talking about trends, I guess, what is a trend? And the tendency is to think that a trend is just something hot that's happening at the moment. So this is an example of the Harlem Shake and the latest video that's come out of Japan in a Japanese bath shrine. So it doesn't mean that that's not a trend, but we try and look at things a little bit under the surface. And so this is how we define a trend and how we look our trends up. So we call it a manifestation of something that is unlocked or newly serviced an existing want, need, desire, or value. So sometimes the consumer doesn't know that value is inside them, and you untap it or unlock it, or otherwise you make them rediscover it. So I'm going to show you some images of Asia, and I want you to tell me what you get out of those images. This is Hong Kong. That's Bombay. And that's actually Sanya, which is considered the Hawaii of China, and that's during a Golden Week holiday. That's a holiday, by the way. So anybody have any ideas what those pictures all show?
Population.
Sorry?
Population.
Yeah, exactly. Overpopulation. And to me, that's exactly what's going to drive Asia's future. It's the megacities. Megacities are considered places with over sort of 10 million in terms of population. And that's what I think makes Asia quite different from other places on the planet. When you've got that level of population in one city, you're going to get amazing excitement and amazing innovation for that aspect of it, but you also need amazing solutions in order to make living in those cities doable. So what I'm not going to talk about, actually, the big elephants in the room, are sort of eco and sustainability, not because I don't think they're huge, but I think a lot of you probably do know that those are trends happening in Asia for megacities. And I'm also not really going to talk about health, even though that's a massive emerging trend. What I really want to do is find new, wacky angles to look at that might make you think in slightly different ways. So this is how we're going to look at the future. So first we're going to look at the idea of cramming, which is when you're time pressed in an urban setting, you want to cram in as much as possible into every single minute and moment. You don't want to waste a single one. So it's the idea that people need to rethink the potential of every single moment. The other aspect is maximum cities. So that's logistics. What is the urban future like in Asia's megacities? Then we're going to look at tribes and lives, and that's the idea of demographics. So you need to rethink some of the life stage needs of certain consumers who are living in these cities. And the last aspect is empowerment. And this is the idea of you need to rethink who's in charge anymore. Is it really the government, or is it actually a community coming together? So we're going to start with cramming. And cramming is the idea of having more experiences, content, data, social, e-commerce, all one place or in one interface. So the first thing we're going to look at is physical cramming. So how a physical space can sort of cram in a lot of opportunities. So it's about immersive, it's about multi-sensory, multi-platform. It's where online and the physical sort of converge together. And one example of this is obviously in Tokyo, because you need sensory stimulation over there. And this is a robot-themed sushi restaurant in Shinjuku. And the idea is that they have a nightly mock fight that happens on LED-encrusted tanks, and they're these crazy Valkyrie-like robot fembots that are controlled by cabaret dancers. And people actually come here to eat sushi, so, regular Friday night out. And the other example is from Shanghai. And this is a restaurant called Ultraviolet by Paul Perret. And it's a multi-sensory experience. So what you do is you get taken in a van, you don't know where you're going, and you get into this restaurant space that's not decorated. It's actually entirely covered in sort of video projective walls. And you have 20 courses of food, but every single course of food is accompanied by music that complements it, and lighting effects and sound effects. And the idea is it stimulates so many parts of your senses that you get something different out of the food that you eat. So we've looked at physical sort of cramming of spaces, but digital is an amazing opportunity because you can multitask and hypertask to a whole new level. So that aspect maybe isn't totally new, but what is new is the fact that people don't even want to go between applications anymore in Asia. They want one interface to have everything crammed into it so that they can really hypertask off of it and not waste a single second. And a great example of this is WeChat. WeChat was originally called Weixin, and it was in China. And they renamed it when they wanted to expand across the English-speaking world. And WeChat is literally like social media on pills. So if you go into it, you've got one interface, and I can send text messages, I can send voice reminders and voice messages, I can Skype right off of it, I can send a plethora of emoticons, I can now even shake my phone and Shazam it, I can Instagram off of it, and this is all in one interface. And the other aspect of it too is it's even got stranger finding facilities to it. So if I shake my phone, anyone else shaking their phone at that exact moment in time, I can connect with them. I can also get sort of a drift bottle application. So I write a little message, and it literally goes in a cute little visual of a bottle that drifts out at sea, and anyone else who wants to catch it can send a drift bottle message back to me. So really, just a plethora of ways to sort of interact with people, connect, and even express yourself. And I think the same thing is happening inside retail. So e-commerce is a new phenomenon, but what is happening today is that Asia's mega malls aren't really outside anymore. They're online. So you're getting absolute aggregation of products across consumer categories in one place. And the key to this, I think, is that it's aggregation, curation, and it's also access without geographical limits. So if I'm sitting in a small town, I can get what you can buy over here. And I think that is really the game changer. So one example of this is Flipkart. Flipkart is out of India, and it started in 2007, and it only sold books, so Amazon style. After that, last year, in July 2012, it opened up Flight. And Flight is like iTunes, so you can buy all sorts of Bollywood tunes and international music on it. And then in November, it opened Flight eBooks. So it's literally become an Amazon killer in India and pushed Amazon right out of the picture. And today, it's worth about $800 million after 150 million seed funding, and 4.5 million people use this site. And of course, the one that we have to talk about is Taobao. Taobao is not just China's biggest online marketplace, it's Asia's biggest online marketplace. Its turnover last year, it's got two aspects to it. So Tmall is where industries and brands can sort of get to people, and then Taobao is actually shop fronts from people who put up their own stores and their own things on it. And together, collectively last year, they made $160 billion in cash. And to give you a comparison, eBay actually only made $67 billion. So this is really, again, a game changer. And what Taobao has done is they've done this sort of concept across the categories. So they've now got an online convenience store where you can get like your daily goods that you need. They've got Taobao Maps. They've got an online Android store. And last year what they did is this amazing campaign called Singles Day. And Singles Day is like the Black Friday or the Valentine's Day of China. And what they told single people is like, yeah, we know you're single and you're probably online shopping anyway, so why not shop on Taobao? And just that one message created $3 billion in one day of shopping. That's it. So we've seen how physical experiences can be crammed, how online experiences can also be crammed into moments. And the other aspect I think that's also going to get crammed is this concept of social commerce. So slowly e-commerce is turning into social commerce. And one of the reasons we feel that this is happening is because in Asia we've always been really social when it comes to shopping. We're used to mom and pop shops and outdoor markets where you bargain and you chat and then you only buy things. And e-commerce actually has kind of taken that out of the equation. Because when you go online nowadays, they're really just static aggregators of products, and you get a set of social media buttons on the side where you go, I like this, I share this, I do this. That's actually not really the way we interact when we shop together. And so what's going to happen more and more is that commerce is going to get social, so that it puts a social aspect back in, the person-to-person and the chatting aspect back in, and the friend comparison, reviews. It's going to become much more sociable, basically. And a good example of this is Meili Shuo. Meili Shuo is out of China, and it's like a Pinterest board-style e-commerce site. But what they've done is they've tied up with Taobao that we just saw, so that you can click through the Pinterest boards and buy straight off of it. And now they've even tied up with WeChat. So imagine, with all the stuff already on WeChat, I can sit down and have a conversation with someone about the things that I just bought, and I can actually visually share my shopping cart via Meili Shuo, and then I can buy what my friend has bought off that shopping cart as well. So you're taking away the barriers of having to go between sites and between applications and making it a much more organic shopping experience. So people are starting to put commerce where the social conversations are already happening. So it's the idea that social first and buying becomes sort of by the way. It's friend recommended, it's not intrusive, it's not a hard sell. So we see now experiences are getting very, very crammed. And that's the exciting part of a city. But we have to go back to this aspect that not everything is so exciting when you have 21 million or 23 million people in Shanghai competing with you for space. And that's what we call a maximum city. So here's a stat just to give you an idea. So by 2020, there'll be 850 million Chinese consumers in urban areas compared to 650 million, and that's only in 2010. So the first thing that's going to happen is if you have this much space and loads more people in it, you're going to be very strapped for space. So with swelling populations, space is going to become a premium. And that means you have to extract maximum value from every square meter of it. So you're going to see foldable and stackable and vertical and all sorts of new combinations to try and make 1 square meter go much further. And one aspect of this is microhomes. So this is China Vanke, and it's opened up a microhome property. And every property is about 160 square feet. To give you an idea, that's the size of a parking lot. So they've actually reconfigured everything inside this apartment. So they have a full functioning apartment, but in 160 square feet. And it goes for about $135 compared to the $300 that are usually what you'd spend in this area. And to give you an idea, there are 50 million Chinese today that have substandard housing. So this is really to combat that sort of an issue or problem. And if you're having houses that are sort of shrinking, you kind of need everything else in the house to shrink as well. And large appliance brands need to think about this, or anybody creating furniture, any product that goes inside a house. And Daewoo in Korea has thought of this. One of the things that's also happening with the shoebox and the microhome apartments is people are also noticing there are a lot more singles in the world. So you're looking at a lot of single-user households. So having massive washing machines doesn't make sense anymore. And this is the world's first wall-mountable washing machine. So it actually uses 86% less water, it's 60% less energy savings, and it's quite different, as you can see from most products. And the last thing that's going to happen is food. if you have a huge burgeoning population, you have to think of ways to sort of feed them. In Singapore, we tend to import everything, but that's not an ideal solution when you think about the future or logistics or any problems we might have with resources in other parts of the world. So what Singapore has done is actually, this is in Q2 of 2012, Sky Green set up. And it's literally 3.35 hectares of land built up in 30 feet massive columns that are just filled with organic vegetables that are being grown. And the idea is that this should create half a ton of vegetables every single day to feed Singapore's population. And it's about space maximization, they reuse the water and recycle it, and it's one of the first sort of concepts that's being popped up in the world. So apart from lack of space, you've got traffic issues in maximum cities. And what we see in Vietnam, or if you go to Bombay, is a lot of two-wheeler traffic. So everybody's on two-wheelers because that's the easiest way to navigate traffic. So that's no surprise on a personal level. But what is interesting is that brands and public services realize that in order to be fast and reliable and actually really help people and be more flexible, they need two-wheelers as well. I'm just going to show you one example. And this is really interesting. It's the Pune Fire Brigade. So this year, out of 11 fire stations, they're going to roll out Royal Enfield bikes that are actually kitted out to be self-sufficient little fire engines. So they've got, the entire hose in the back and everything else. And the main problem in places like Pune and Bombay are the fact that you've got a lot of little alleyways and shortcuts that fire trucks actually just can't get through. So it's a great way to get to lives and save lives faster. So they've really thought about the urban sprawl. And this is a recent one that you might have seen in the Singapore paper 2 days ago. If you took the MRT 2 days ago, like I did, and waited for 4 trains to get on, you can see why the Land Transport Authority is pretty worried and lots of people are complaining. So their new tactic is that they're going to spend $10 million that they don't expect to sort of reabsorb, and they're going to pay for your MRT ride. So if you clock in and clock out at your destination by 7:45 in the morning, Singapore says they'll pay for your MRT ride and it's free. And if you go between 7:45 and 8, it'll be 50 cents off. So the idea is that they're trying to get people to get out of the peak hour areas by giving you free rides. And it's one of the first concepts happening in the world. And we could really see this as a potential for a lot of other mega cities. How do you deal with population? What incentives can you give to help the overcrowding? And the last aspect is if you're sitting inside a city, what's going to happen is the more that you get residential buildings, the more that you get all these other aspects, you're going to miss green spaces and parks and spaces to actually breathe and live in. So how is this going to affect cities? As well as that, a little bit of the eco aspect is the idea of bringing nature back and the idea that you need sustainable cities to live in. So a lot of smart cities and green cities are coming up now as well. And this is the Chengdu Tianfu district. It's the world's first car-free, pedestrian-only smart city in the world. And the idea is they're testing out the idea that if you make a city walkable, that you don't have all these other kinds of transport problems. It also, is energy saving. It creates all the energy that it needs within the city. It recycles all the water. And the idea is this is a testing ground. If it works out, you can roll it out across other cities in China. And the last aspect is if you can't have green, sprawling parks, then where do you put the greenery? And this is an example from Woha Architects. So they're the same guys who've done the Park View on Pickering, with the hanging gardens. So the new one, this is an entirely green facaded building. And on every one of the 4 levels, there are actually little sky gardens and foyers that people can walk out onto. So it's giving people that nature that they need and growing it vertically instead of across. So we've seen how experiences are getting crammed. We've seen how cities are also getting crammed. But all that obviously is going to affect people that are actually living inside cities themselves. If you're time pressed, if you don't have enough time to get around, if you're stressed, all of this is going to sort of put certain pressures on your life. And we're going to look at a couple of sects of them very quickly. So I'm not looking at every trend, but I'm trying to give you some thought starters about the future for these guys. So solo Zoomers are about singles in cities. We know that they're dating applications and all those aspects, but the reality is, till you meet that special somebody, you're on your own and you're pretty lonely. How do you deal with that? So in Japan, they've set up Sonaya. And the idea is it's for lonely singles who just really want to sleep next to somebody and have a little bit of company. So you pay to do nothing, just sleep next to someone at night and have that company for $66 US. So I thought that's kind of an interesting concept, but it's also really a reality. And the other one is couples. So we've seen apps like Pair, Between, where people can talk to each other. But the other reality is that a lot of couples are being split apart. They're working in different cities, they're traveling a lot. So how do you keep the sort of emotionality and the physicality of a relationship going when you're not together? And that's what Love Pals does. So this is from Taiwan. and they're Wi-Fi enabled and iPhone sort of controlled sex toys, so that you can actually keep your relationship fresh even when you're apart. Families have a similar problem as well. So in order to give children their best future possible, parents are splitting apart to go where the best jobs are. And that's an even more difficult situation, because Skype and Facebook are great to just interact face-to-face with your child. But how do you engage back in activities that really promote quality time and bonding? And that's what Family Co has done. The Philippines obviously has a huge problem with this, where you have domestic workers, construction workers, all of them going overseas as well. And so this is a video conferencing facility that while you talk to your child, you can actually have educational games and activities and things to play with them, so that A, it keeps your child entertained so they stay on for longer, but the other aspect is you're actually engaging with them in a way that you would in real life, in actual activities. And the last aspect is aging. So today's aging consumers are not the guys in the old folks' homes that you're in school and you sing to when you're in a choir. They're actually really active. They've got help, medical help, they live longer lifestyles, they're consuming a lot more. What most people don't even think about is the fact that grandparents today who have enough disposable income, they don't even just spend on themselves. They spend online on their kids, on their grandchildren, on everyone else. So they're really the world's super consumers. And people need to rethink that aspect when catering to them. So this is a great example from Lanza Vecchia in Hawaii. And they've realized that today, older consumers, if they're more active, they want to age gracefully. They don't want assisted living things that look like they were made in 1985. So they've created these beautiful designer pieces of furniture that are actually assisted living pieces. So you've got a light with a magnifying glass on it. You've got, enabled chairs. You've got canes that have rollers on them. But all of them look really beautiful and well crafted. And this is from Korea. So in Korea, what they've started to do is actually a senior film festival. And the Daewon's Film Festival is not just picking topics for movies that are relevant to older people, so 50 plus, but the directors for all the films have to be 50 plus themselves. So it is quite an interesting concept. So you get people in who are of the same age to cater to their own generation. This is actually happening in India as well, where you're getting retired people coming back into the office to actually offer experience and advice to sort of younger people and mentor them. But the other aspect is teaching them how to cater to aging consumers. And in Singapore, by the way, P&G has started an initiative over here together with the university, and they're trying to build products only for aging consumers, and that's coming out of Singapore itself. And the last group is youth, of course. Asia is considered, the absolute youth boom of the world. But what we're going to look at is not just typical youth. I want to look at 2-3 countries that we don't necessarily think about and how youth are changing there. So in Japan, due to Fukushima, due to sort of Western corporations moving out, Japan is a very different place today. It's not the same sort of high-end, growth market that it used to be, and the rest of Asia is actually taking over. So how's this affecting Japanese youth? They feel that joining the rat race like their parents did isn't really beneficial anymore. And you've got tons of Japanese youth that are actually quitting their jobs in Tokyo and moving back out to urban farms and becoming country farmers and going for slow living, because they think that's a better quality of life in the end. And this is in Ulaanbaatar in Mongolia. So in Mongolia, a lot of changes are happening. They're very unhappy with the way the landscape is changing, the nomadic life is changing, Chinese are getting in and getting resources. And what very few people know about is that in November 2012, there was a huge documentary called Mongolia Bling, and it documented the hip-hop movement happening in Mongolia at the moment. So it's, using local instruments, but the whole idea is that they're expressing themselves against all these issues that are sort of happening in the urban environment and that the government is not dealing with properly. And the same thing is also happening in Yangon. So in Myanmar, there's a punk movement going on, and there's a new crowdsourced book coming out called Yangon Calling. And again, it's about dissatisfaction with unemployment, with the militaristic regime. So these youth are really rethinking their place in the world. And brands need to rethink how they cater to them as well. So don't think that these sort of less developed or quieter markets, they have a lot going on underneath the ground as well. And the last part we're going to look at today is empowerment. So it's the idea that if you've got to rethink every moment, you've got to rethink the logistics of a city, you've got to rethink life stages and needs, who is actually going to rethink all of that and solve the problem? And I don't think it's the government anymore. People today, or younger generations today, don't think the governments are the gods they used to be and that they can take care of everything. When you've got an overpopulation problem, it's actually logistically a nightmare to take care of that stuff. And so people are coming on board right now to collaborate with governments and take care of some of these things. So it's the idea that netizens are using the crowd cloud of crowd platforms, shareable documents, social media to solve pressing urban problems. And this is an example from Newton Circus, a community agency over here, as well as it was a smart city movement from MIT. And it was one of the first hackathons that sort of happened. And the idea is they took big data. So you're talking about, transport logistics, taxis, mobile phone usage, and they put all that data together with creative thinkers. And they thought, why don't we put these two people together and just experiment? Let's see if they can solve some of the city's most pressing urban problems. And they got 5 great solutions. They were presented at the World City Summit, and the government thought they were brilliant and actually decided to fund them. So there really is potential because we do care about our cities. We want to solve the problems in it because we want to live in better places. And there's a really interesting one from Nepal called Gully Gully. So Gully actually means alleyway. And it's by a Nepalese entrepreneur who realized that there's just no viable working map of Nepal because there's so many little alleyways. So why not use the people who traverse them every day? So he's crowdsourcing to create a living working map of Nepal that people can use for public services, that they can use, that tourists can use, so that actually becomes a more viable tourist destination. So it's really using the wisdom of the crowds to solve a problem the government can't. And this is it at its best. So when governments actually can't step in and solve crisis situations today, people are, because obviously there are more of them and they're usually spread out and part of the disaster. So these are 2 examples, one from Manila and one from Bombay. And these were instigated by citizens themselves. So in Bombay, when there was a massive flood, citizens realized that people were caught and couldn't get home. So that somebody started a shareable Google document, and they put their phone number and their location, geolocationed on, and said, I'm here, if you need a ride, this is how you can get to me, and I'll take you home if you live near me. And this became a huge sort of Google Map and Google shareable situation, and people actually helped each other through this disaster. And Manila, it went an even step further. So you got a Google shared doc. People used Twitter to actually Twitter what was happening with the disaster. Red Cross workers took all that information and created a shareable sheet where you could figure out where people were, where the disaster was happening, where it was okay, and they didn't waste their time going to places they didn't have to. So it made them much more efficient. And here's the interesting aspect. It's a place that brands can get involved in as well. Because if you have those tools, why not help out? Why not show that you actually care enough to collaborate for a community? And Google did that in Manila. They started to create a live working Google map of the disaster. And they even had a missing person finder so you could figure out where people were. And they coordinated all of the documents from all of these different sources and mapped them online. And the last aspect is activism. So if you've got that social reach and that social clout, people who have causes are going to actually start to recruit for those causes and spread those causes online. And this is happening massively in China. You've seen the recent corruption crackdown over there. And there's actually, and this idea of the human flesh search engine is actually a translation. It's the idea that people literally scour the internet, almost like in a witch hunt, to find somebody and right a wrong. So one example of this is there was a bus accident and a high-end official was seen with a very, very glamorous-looking watch on his arm. And he was smirking through this entire process. And netizens were just absolutely offended by this. So they went out and across the internet came together to scour and figure out who this official was. And it turned out to be Yang Ditai. And he got prohibited and suspended from government due to that. So they literally are going out to seek the truth and to right wrongs that the government they don't think is taking care of fast enough. And the last part is it can go all out into rebellion. So Anonymous is getting a lot of sort of traction and buzz around the world. And where it was least expected to be picked up is in India, where youth don't tend to be that riotous. But in India, with the internet, with all the internet problems and the censorship aspects of it and the RIM aspects of it, where BlackBerry was supposed to be giving out, codes so that the government could track, people were getting very upset. And so Anonymous took credit for bringing down the Congress's main website, the government's main website, the defense's main website, and they even took to 16 cities and did live physical protests, which is not usually Anonymous style, and it gained a lot of traction in India. So those are all the different aspects. So I think for the future of Asia, the things that need to be looked at is you need to rethink the potential of moments, rethink urban logistics, rethink people's actual life stage needs. They may not be exactly what you think they are. And also rethink who has the real power to change things. It's not really the governments anymore. It's a collaboration between governments and communities and people working together to solve those problems much faster. And that's the end. Thank you.
Anyone have any questions?
Hi Tara, great talk. How do you find these trends? Like, are you like online and you search the data to find out what people are buzzing about, or I mean, it's just from your experiences on the street and hanging out with people? Yeah. So how do you find the trends?
I think it's a mixture. So we actually have spotters that are on the ground across Asia, and so they feed us things that they're spotting. But the other aspect also is that we obviously really scour sources. So we scour everything online that's physically possible. We scour local publications. A lot of times you will find, print magazines in India that you just can't get online. So we'll actually buy those things and look at them. We'll read people's blogs because obviously people are passionate and have their own interests that others don't. So we scour all of these different kinds of sources, and then if we find something interesting, we might even feather it out to a spotter going, we found this in India, is this happening in China as well? So that's what we do. And obviously, living in some of the markets helps as well. Definitely.
Thank you so much for the fantastic talk. I realized that there wasn't great representation of Southeast Asia and the trends that you were talking about. And I was just wondering if that's something that this region is still a little bit behind compared to places like China and India, Japan.
Right. I think because it was sort of 20, 30 minutes, I couldn't put every example in. We have tons of examples from Southeast Asia as well. So, I think it does vary depending on the trend, but there's definitely a lot happening out of Indonesia. So even for the crowd cracked aspect or the e-activism aspect, there's been sort of a whole blogger movement online in Indonesia against corruption as well. That's really happening with, youth over there. And there are definitely a lot of aspects happening. Singapore, I think there's a lot happening as well. Malaysia, there's definitely a lot of e-commerce and online movements. Actually, people are plotting that Malaysia is that hidden gem, and it's supposed to be the next e-commerce boom over there, and no one's really clocking it. So I think definitely Southeast Asia is boom time. And a lot of the actual trade agreements being made between Southeast Asia, I think are also going to change a lot of things and make that innovation even faster.
Thank you, Terry. It was very informative. How much do you benchmark the past history in terms of how you see the future trending now? Do you see a lot of recurring themes and trends that are useful and relevant to what's happening now?
I definitely think past history is really important. Some trends are ongoing, like there are a lot of trends maybe I didn't even look at that are definitely ongoing trends. I think the past is really important for Asia because, history and tradition are really part of being an Asian person as well. I think if you look at a place like China, that has a lot to do with it. One of the main things that are happening in Asia is that if you see the level of rapid industrialization, the reality is Chinese, Indians, a lot of people are struggling to sort of understand their place in the world, especially youth, in a time where everything's changing. So what's happening is that Chinese youth actually have a huge nostalgia movement, and even Indian youth are having this nostalgia movement. And we call it a faux nostalgia almost, because they're actually harkening back to things that were in their parents' time that they never even experienced. And the reality is it's because it's tradition, it's a piece of India that they can at least hold on to in a time when there's really nothing else to hold on to. So we're definitely seeing aspects like that, or spirituality is getting a massive update. It's growing in China. In all over Asia, we're seeing faith being reimagined on like iPhone apps and all these sort of aspects. So it's people also trying to hold on to faith and something that's comforting and something they really believe in a time where everything else is changing. So I definitely think past history and all those aspects are very important when looking at a consumer today.
Well, Tara, thank you for the provocation. But the question is that when you talk about trend, the future, more often you notice that the presenters are covering on matters that is ongoing, currency like that, but rather than the future. Well, your reference, for example, the Singapore incidental in the question of the SMRT, is not innovation, it's desperation. So the question of that, the question is that in Singapore, where the foreigners, the expat would always say wonderful thing about Singapore, but Singaporean like me and the others will find it, the bureaucracy, hierarchy here, change is evil. So the question is that when you want to talk about innovation, why not concentrate on what's the unknown and the forthcoming rather than what is the past and the ongoing, because that's not necessarily good. The question is change for the better or change for the sake of changing. Thanks, Lord.
Sure. I think one of the things is, trends is a very weird aspect. Like you can look, the future is a very sort of wishy-washy aspect. Like you could look at the future in 1 year or 2 years, or I could look 20 years down the road. And I've chosen to look at more of a near future. And I've chosen to, and yes, maybe I've looked at things like, like the sort of MRT aspect, and it doesn't seem like innovation. But I think also people need to rethink what is innovation. And it is desperation, and I think you're totally right. But necessity, to me, is the mother of invention. Desperation causes people to innovate. So for example, if you look at the idea of jugaad that's happening around Asia, those are people inside villages that are desperate for innovation that companies are not providing them with. So they're building it themselves. So I think desperation and failure and limits actually is the best thing for design and innovation because it drives you in no other way. So I do actually think that even though it doesn't seem very relevant, I think it is. And overcrowding, for example, that is also happening all over the world. I think the LTA, maybe it's a strange concept or a theory, but at least they're trying something out. And I think that's also really important today as well. It's not like talking about doing something for 3 years. It's prototyping it and trying it on the spot and seeing if it works out. And I think consumers and citizens are also changing. It's okay if it fails, but they'd rather that you try to solve that problem than just sit back and wait.
As we mentioned, starting this year, we do have a pitch project. So every